In a world where the line between art and nightmare has vanished, only one man dared to turn darkness into something the public could admire: Rob Zombie. From a lonely boy growing up near an old Massachusetts cemetery, witnessing a carnival go up in flames, to the man who made Hollywood bow before a horror metal empire built from blood, sweat, and deranged imagination, his journey is far more than music. It's the story of a soul forever walking against the light, where fear itself becomes the purest source of creativity. He doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, lives vegan and reclusive on a quiet farm. Yet every time he steps on stage, he becomes the most vivid nightmare rock and roll has ever seen. People call him crazy, but perhaps it's that very madness that's kept rock's spirit alive. This isn't just the biography of Rob Zombie, it's the odyssey of a man who turned hell into a stage and proved that sometimes, to truly be seen, you must walk straight into the place everyone else is too afraid to face. No one is born a monster. Before becoming the face of horror rock, Rob Zombie was just a boy standing amid ashes, watching his world burn without knowing why. Born in 1965 in Haverhill, Massachusetts, Rob grew up in a working-class family that made a living running a traveling carnival, a world where bright lights masked the deceit and hustles beneath the canvas. Every night, as the fair came alive, the air filled with the screech of rides, the smell of popcorn, and the dizzying music of the carousel. But behind that glittering facade lay arguments, schemes, and the harsh tricks of survival. To young Rob, childhood felt like one long carnival dream. Dazzling, yet never real. Then that dream turned into a nightmare. In 1977, when Rob was 12, a riot erupted at the carnival. The tents went up in flames, screams tore through the night, and people ran in all directions. Rob froze as he watched a man beaten with a hammer collapse before his eyes. A horrifying image seared into his memory. From that night on, the sound of fire and the stench of smoke haunted him, leaving a scar that would later creep into every riff, lyric, and frame he created. An obsession transformed into art. After the incident, his parents left the carnival life behind in search of stability. But to Rob, that peace felt like a cage. He grew withdrawn, retreating into his own world, spending hours in front of the television devouring every horror movie he could find: Phantom of the Opera, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, A Clockwork Orange. To him, these weren't just entertainment, they were lessons in darkness, a way to understand fear and why something so terrifying could also be so beautiful. When he wasn't watching films, he wandered through the old cemeteries of New England, where moss-covered gravestones whispered through the wind. Among them, Rob imagined grotesque characters, half human, half demon, and slowly learned to see beauty in the macabre. Where others turned away, he moved closer. His idols weren't flawless heroes, but the outsiders. Alice Cooper with his sinister makeup, Kiss with their blazing guitars, Bela Lugosi in his vampire cloak, Stan Lee with his bizarre comic book universe, and Blue Oyster Cult with their ritual-like sound. From them, Rob absorbed 4 languages: horror, rock, comics, and DIY punk, blending them into something raw, haunting, and wildly expressive, what the world would later call the white zombie aesthetic. For most people, such a childhood might have bred fear or withdrawal, but for Rob Zombie, it became the key to another realm. One where darkness wasn't hell, but inspiration. And when that door opened, the boy who once watched the carnival burn was no longer afraid of fire, because now he was ready to learn how to light his own. When the door to childhood finally closed, Rob Zombie carried with him all the fears, obsessions, and twisted imagination that had defined him, straight to New York City, the one place where every misfit could be unapologetically themselves. After graduating high school in 1983, he enrolled at Parsons School of Design, a haven for rebellious souls trying to turn art into a voice. It was there he met Shawn Yseult, a dark-haired girl who wore animal bones around her neck and had eyes that mirrored the strange world inside his mind. They were instantly drawn to each other, like two halves of the same nightmare, lovers and partners in crime. In 1985, they formed White Zombie, a name inspired by the 1932 black-and-white horror film. The band began as a chaotic collision of metal, punk, industrial, and horror. Unlike anything that existed at the time, Rob and Shawn did everything themselves, designing album covers, building stage sets, and recording their first EP, Gods, on Voodoo Moon. Only 300 copies were ever pressed, most of which still sit in Rob's attic today. Those were years of pure struggle. By day, Rob and Shawn worked menial jobs for an art magazine. Guitarist Jay Uenger delivered pizzas, often at knife point in dangerous neighborhoods. By night, they built their own stages from scrap metal, crafted pyrotechnics out of industrial waste, and bled for every performance. No money? They replaced it with sweat. No stage? They built one themselves. At first, White Zombie's music confused East Village audiences. The underground scene labeled them art noise, psycho rock, too strange to categorize. Yet their weirdness caught the attention of a few key figures: Kurt Cobain, Iggy Pop, Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth. Amid the smoke and pounding drums, they all saw one thing. Rob Zombie wasn't imitating anyone. He was creating an entirely new world. And amid the noise, the rundown tour buses, and the damp basement studios, Rob still didn't realize that the nightmare he'd been nurturing was about to come alive. But the price of turning nightmares into art, sometimes, is more terrifying than the fears you were running from. White Zombie's success didn't happen overnight. It was forged from blood, sweat, and absolute conviction. After years of grinding through the darkness of tiny clubs, in 1992 they signed with Geffen Records, a turning point that transformed their underground dream into reality. Their major label debut, La Sexorcisto, Devil Music Vol. 1, was a monstrous creation, chaotic, mechanical, packed with horror film samples, pop culture fragments, and warped religious imagery. But that hellish sound nearly died before it could live. The album was filled with unlicensed samples, from Vincent Price's laugh to snippets of Charles Manson's voice, forcing the label to rework it under legal pressure. When released, sales were sluggish, around 75,000 copies, dismissed as an oddity from the fringe. Then fate intervened. The song Thunder Kiss 65, with its roaring guitar riff and Rob's demonic growl, appeared on the animated MTV show Beavis and Butthead. Within weeks, sales exploded past 2 million copies, propelling White Zombie from basement obscurity to the Billboard charts. But with the light came misunderstanding. The media dubbed them the band made famous by Beavis and Butthead, treating them as a cartoon joke rather than serious musicians. Meanwhile, conservative America recoiled in horror. Their videos, filled with skulls, demons, and satanic imagery, got them banned from multiple states. Church groups branded them devil music. Few realized that the satanic theatrics were satire, Rob's way of mocking the hypocrisy of moral panic, turning fear itself into something people could dance to. Beneath the pounding drums and grinding metal, La Sexorcisto was a manifesto, a celebration of raw instinct and primal chaos in a world suffocated by norms. The album not only made White Zombie stars, but also gave birth to a new subgenre, horror groove metal, where everything forbidden became art. Yet while fans screamed to Thunder Kiss 65, Something darker was growing within the band. Quiet, slow, corrosive. They no longer recorded together, each member isolated in separate rooms, buses, and lives. Outwardly, everything looked perfect. Sold-out tours, platinum records, awards. But inside, White Zombie was rotting from the core. The band had become a machine, powerful but soulless. By 1998, the inevitable happened. White Zombie disbanded. Rob Zombie, the very spirit that had birthed it, walked away. Many thought it was the end. But Rob never believed in endings. To him, collapse wasn't death. It was transformation. And while the world assumed he had lost everything, Rob was quietly preparing for his most shocking evolution yet, to turn the nightmare of White Zombie into an empire entirely his own. After White Zombie disbanded, many believed Rob would vanish along with the madness he had created. But they were wrong. Only a few months later, Rob Zombie returned, alone, with his debut solo album, Hellbilly Deluxe, 1998. And it wasn't just a comeback, it was an explosion. From the very first riff of Dragula, listeners knew, Rob was no longer the front man of a band. He was the master of hell itself, controlling every sound with his own two hands. The song fused industrial metal, classic rock, machine-grinding effects, and lyrics that felt like a high-speed ritual, brutal yet hypnotic. Then came Living Dead Girl, dark, seductive, and slow, like a lullaby sung by a smiling corpse. The whole album felt like a journey through a world of zombies, demons, and mechanical souls, where horror was no longer something to fear, but something beautiful to behold. Hellbilly Deluxe quickly sold millions, making Rob one of the rare metal artists of the MTV and nu metal era to retain his raw individuality. His image, dreadlocked hair, leather jacket, fiery eyes, became a cultural symbol of the late 90s. Following its success, Rob released The Sinister Urge, 2001, a fusion of groove and industrial energy where tracks like Never Gonna Stop and Feel So Numb proved that he could merge danceable rhythm with the spirit of the devil himself. In 2006, he released Educated Horses, a surprising turn. The music felt less mechanical, more introspective, as if Rob was peeling off his demonic skin to look at the human beneath. The album startled fans. How could a man who thrived on chaos learn to tell stories through silence? But that was only the surface. While his music grew calmer, another fire began to burn inside him, the fire of cinema. Rob was about to become the director of the nightmares he had long been dreaming. And no one yet realized that from here on, Rob Zombie would not only make people listen, he would make them see what they never wanted to see. In 2010, he released Hellbilly Deluxe 2, the long-awaited sequel to the album that had shaken the metal world a decade earlier. But this time, Rob wasn't trying to prove anything. He had become a madman who had learned to control the chaos. The album was packed with industrial crunch, heavy riffs, hammer-like drums, and songs like Sick Bubblegum and Mars Needs Women, which showed that his madness had evolved, refined, like a beast that had learned how to hunt in the dark. 3 years later came Venomous Rat Regeneration Vendor, 2013, an album Rob himself described as what Frankenstein's engine might sound like. It mixed cold industrial beats with the filthy groove of old-school rock. The highlight, Dead City Radio and the New Gods of Supertown, served as an anthem about media corruption, where Rob simultaneously mocked and celebrated American pop culture like a nationwide satanic broadcast. By 2016, with the Electric Warlock Acid Witch Satanic Orgy, Celebration Dispenser, Rob threw away every boundary. The album was short, fierce, and cinematic, a wild trip where synths, bass, and guitars melted into an acid-fueled delirium, leaving listeners both exhilarated and disoriented. Here, Rob wasn't telling a story. He was creating an experience. Every track felt like a scene from a B-movie he might have directed. Neon lights, demons, robots, and the downfall of humankind. Then came The Lunar Injection Kool-Aid Eclipse Conspiracy, 2021. A different world altogether. Mature, eerie, and reflective. The fire was still there, but now laced with retro groove and echoes of 1970s rock. Songs like King Freak and Shake Your Ass, Smoke Your Grass showed that Rob Zombie had become a true sonic magician, manipulating rhythm, emotion, and memory with just a few razor-sharp guitar notes. Though his sound has evolved over time, Rob Zombie's essence has never strayed from his three sacred pillars: metal, industrial, and horror. Every album is a theater for what the world calls evil, yet can't stop watching. He doesn't just sing about demons, he becomes one, to prove that within every human being lies a darkness waiting to be set free. And after conquering music, Rob turned his gaze to another stage, one without guitars or flashing lights, only blood, shadows, and a camera. Because for Rob Zombie, when sound is no longer enough to tell the story, cinema will finish the nightmare for him. Music allowed Rob Zombie to tell his nightmares through sound, but film let him bring them to life with blood and image. Once he had conquered the world of metal, Rob set his sights on a realm few rockers dared to enter: horror filmmaking. And, as with everything he touched, it didn't just attract attention. It shocked people to their core. His directorial debut, House of 1,000 Corpses, 2003, was a bold gamble. Universal initially refused to release it, calling the film too violent, too depraved. But Rob refused to back down. When it finally premiered, audiences realized this wasn't some cheap shocker. It was a carnival of blood, fear, and fury, staged like a deranged dream that refused to end. The film quickly became a cult classic, hailed by horror fans as the rebirth of the 1970s grindhouse aesthetic, a world where every moral boundary was torn apart. 2 years later came The Devil's Rejects, 2005. Not just a sequel, but a far more mature and devastating film. If the first movie was a nightmare, then The Devil's Rejects was the aftermath. Grim, brutal, yet haunted by the emptiness of killers devoured by their own evil. By blending unflinching violence with psychological depth, Rob turned the film into a distorted mirror of human nature, something viewers found both repulsive and mesmerizing. It was hailed as the resurrection of grindhouse cinema, cementing Rob Zombie's evolution from metal madman to a filmmaker with a distinct, fearless voice. Then he did the unthinkable. He tackled one of horror's holiest icons, Halloween, 2007, and Halloween 2, 2009. But instead of a simple remake, Rob reimagined Michael Myers through a darker, more psychological, and deeply tragic lens. He didn't tell the story of a monster. He told the story of a boy raised by darkness. Both films sparked outrage and debate, especially among fans of John Carpenter. Yet even critics admitted Rob had dragged the slasher legend back to its raw, filthy, and disturbingly human roots. Behind the scenes, Rob directed with the same relentless energy he once brought to the stage. Obsessive, intense, and uncompromising. He used washed-out colors, shrieking sound design, and dizzying camera movements to recreate the sensation of being trapped inside a madman's head. And though the audience was terrified, they couldn't look away. After Halloween 2, Rob found himself straddling two worlds, music and film, one filled with the roar of metal, the other with screams in the dark. But instead of choosing, he did what no one expected. He fused them. Because to Rob Zombie, Fear wasn't something to hear or see. It was something to believe in. After redefining modern horror with Halloween, Rob continued building his own universe, where the line between nightmare and satire, violence and humor, vanished completely. 3. From Hell, 2019, served as the conclusion to the Firefly trilogy, following House of 1,000 Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. But this time, instead of a blood feast, Rob crafted a tragedy about the immortality of evil, where the once brutal killers had become cultural icons, worshipped like heroes. In the film, he reversed the roles of good and evil, turning every character into a broken fragment of humanity, grotesque yet pitiful. Production was riddled with grief. Veteran actor Sid Haig passed away before completing his role, forcing Rob to rewrite the entire story. But that loss gave the film an eerie sorrow, the sadness of someone who had lived too long in hell. Then, after all that carnage, Rob stunned everyone by changing course entirely with The Munsters, 2022, a move no one saw coming. From blood and violence, he pivoted to retro horror comedy, reviving the classic 1960s sitcom with vibrant colors, vintage music, and a strangely cheerful tone. The Munsters wasn't an apology, it was a declaration. Rob Zombie can build hell, but he can also make you laugh inside it. The film was theatrical, nostalgic, and even romantic. Proof that even monsters, when loved, can smile. Few know that between these projects, Rob was preparing another film, Tyrannosaurus Rex, 2009, a gritty story about a fallen boxer seeking redemption, drenched in violence and despair. But the studio grew wary of its massive budget and canceled it. Ironically, the long-haired, bearded version of Michael Myers in Halloween 2 came directly from Rob's concept design for Tyrannosaurus Rex. The film never saw the light of day, but its ghost lived on, waiting, perhaps, to be reborn. And just when the world thought Rob had stepped away from music, he shocked the rock scene once more by forming the supergroup LA Rats, 2021, alongside Nikki Sixx, Mötley Crüe, John 5, and Tommy Clufetos, Ozzy Osbourne. Their debut single, I've Been Everywhere, roared like a manifesto, a reminder that Rob Zombie remains rock's eternal wanderer, moving through blood, smoke, and fear, but never stopping. The world may call him a director, a musician, or a madman, but to Rob, those are just temporary roles. Beneath all the makeup, distortion, and chaos lies something real, a man who chose solitude over compromise. And in the next chapter, we'll find Rob Zombie no longer on stage or behind a camera, but within his own life, where silence itself can be more terrifying than any scream. After completing The Munsters and reuniting with LA Rats, Rob Zombie seemed to have lived through every version of himself. Musician, filmmaker, counterculture icon. But to understand the man behind the grotesque mask, we have to rewind to the very beginning, to the first woman who helped him build that world, Shawn Yseult. After dropping out of Parsons to pursue music, Rob met Shawn Yseult, the dark-haired girl with eyes that didn't quite belong to this world, in the design program. From their first conversation, they recognized each other as kindred spirits. Rob and Shawn became co-founders of White Zombie, and soon after, lovers. Music and love intertwined. They lived together, spent nights writing riffs, designing stage sets, and shaping the visual identity of their band. Their bond was both muse and motor, the creative energy that transformed White Zombie from a small New York underground act into a global phenomenon. But the glow of the stage lights couldn't hide the cracks forming beneath. The pressure of touring, endless travel, and the exhaustion of living a 24/7 band life began to fracture their connection. Shawn later admitted, The band and the business grew bigger than any relationship could handle. As White Zombie reached its peak, their romance was quietly collapsing. They no longer wrote together, no longer shared the same tour bus bunk. They stood on opposite ends of the same stage, in music and in life. By the early 1990s, Rob and Sean ended their relationship but continued working together for a time. Their breakup wasn't just the end of love. It was a reminder that when art and intimacy intertwine, the line between partnership and sacrifice becomes dangerously thin. Rob eventually moved on to a solo career in filmmaking, while Sean pursued photography, design, and a quieter life in New Orleans. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was a chapter about two people who grew too fast under the same spotlight and had to leave pieces of themselves behind. When Rob turned to horror cinema, Sean returned to art, each finding their own way. Yet, ironically, as Rob moved forward, Sean became the one who carried the most vivid memories of an era that could never be reborn. After parting ways with Sean Yseult and witnessing the breakup of White Zombie, Rob Zombie entered a long silence, a period where music, fame, and money suddenly felt meaningless. He once confessed that after leaving the band, everything was just terrifyingly quiet. In that silence, surrounded only by smoke and unfinished demo tapes, Rob met the woman who would redefine the rest of his life, Sherry Moon. At the time, Sherry was a young dancer and model from Connecticut, newly arrived in Los Angeles, chasing her dreams. They met at an underground show where Rob was immediately drawn to her, wild, radiant, but strangely serene. Sherry, in turn, was intrigued by the calm yet haunted eyes of the man who had lived through the inferno of fame. From their very first conversation, they recognized a shared truth. Both existed outside the shiny surface of Hollywood, in a world where only misfits could truly breathe. Their love was quiet. Rob never brought flowers. Sherry never demanded gifts. They simply traveled together on tour buses, driving through long, empty highways, listening to old horror soundtracks and talking about films. Sherry began appearing in Rob's music videos, gradually becoming his muse, and later his creative partner in everything. When Rob turned to filmmaking, Sherry wasn't just his wife. She became the soul of his cinematic universe. Baby Firefly in House of 1000, Corpses and the Devil's Rejects, and Lily Munster in The Munsters. On screen, she was fierce and magnetic. Off screen, she was the one person who could make Rob laugh with ease. They married on Halloween 2002, the day Rob considered a personal symbol of identity. It wasn't a grand wedding, just a small ceremony with close friends and a pair of worn silver rings. For more than 2 decades, they've remained childless. Not out of indifference, but because they chose to dedicate their entire energy to each other. They divide their time between Los Angeles and a quiet farm in Connecticut, where rescued goats, horses, dogs, cats, and chickens roam freely. For them, it's not just a home. It's a small universe built on compassion, where every living creature is seen and loved. Rob has long been a strict vegan, abstaining from meat since 1982 after watching footage of animal slaughter. The image never left him. Since that day, even though his music overflows with blood and demons, it has always carried a fierce undercurrent of empathy. No alcohol, no drugs, no stimulants. Rob Zombie is perhaps one of the very few heavy metal artists to live a life of near-pure discipline. He actively supports PETA and campaigns against animal cruelty, once saying, "Every act of cruelty toward animals is the beginning of human violence." As for Sherry Moon, the woman who stepped off the stage and onto the screen, she became the eternal cinematic muse in Rob's world. Appearing in nearly every film he has directed, she's more than a seductive icon. She's the embodiment of his creative soul. She, is the soft light within his blood-soaked frames, the balance to his infernal imagination. They don't flaunt affection, share private photos, or chase publicity. Occasionally, they appear together at events, silent, steady, completely in sync. 2 decades on, Rob and Sherry Zombie have never been touched by scandal. In an industry fueled by noise and betrayal, they've chosen silence, living slowly, working together, loving each other by simply sharing the same creative space. "Our love is small," Sherry once said in a rare interview, "but it's big enough to drown out the noise of the world." Perhaps that's the perfect definition of their marriage. Not flashy, but enduring. Like the echo of a heavy metal song played from the heart, never fading. From a boy who once lived among the flames of a carnival to a man who conjured nightmares on screen, Rob Zombie finally found something that fame and fortune could never buy: peace. But one final question lingers. Can a man who's lived his whole life in darkness truly find the light, or has he merely learned how to name it? By 2025, when many of his peers have chosen to retreat into quiet lives, Rob Zombie still refuses to stop. After more than 4 decades of living in metallic riffs and stage fire, he continues to prove that his creative energy has never run dry. In May 2025, Rob returned to the stage at the Sonic Temple Music Festival in Columbus, Ohio, to the deafening roar of thousands. That night's set list was a journey through time, from Thunder Kiss 65 to Living Dead Girl and Dragula, songs that made an entire MTV generation of the 90s feel alive again. Amidst blinding lights and clouds of smoke, he was still unmistakably himself, fierce, bizarre, and impossible to imitate. Not content with a single comeback, Zombie launched a nationwide summer tour across the U.S. in 2025, reuniting with other metal icons for a series of sold-out shows. Each night was proof that even at 60, his fire still burned as fiercely as the first night he grabbed a microphone at CBGB's. Alongside the tour, Rob prepared to release a special book, House of 1,000 Corpses, the making of a cult classic, set for publication in September 2025. The book revisits the behind-the-scenes journey of the film that began his directing career, a way for Zombie to confront his own past and the bloody, deranged characters he once brought to life. Between tours, film projects, and his peaceful farm in Connecticut, Rob Zombie continues to do what few dare: to live authentically. He doesn't chase trends, doesn't compromise, doesn't bow to the market. At 60, he remains a man straddling 2 worlds, half demon, half sage, someone who can sing about hell yet live with profound kindness toward every small creature on earth. And perhaps it's that contradiction that makes Rob Zombie a singular figure, the only artist who can turn darkness into art and horror into humanity. Yet, beneath the stage lights, one question still lingers. When the music stops, does Rob Zombie ever fear the sound of his own silence? When the lights of the 2025 tour finally dim, Rob steps off stage amid the roars of fans who've followed him for nearly half a century. They're not just applauding a performance, they're applauding a lifetime of creation, where music, cinema, and childhood trauma converge into something inseparable. And that's when you realize Rob Zombie's legacy isn't measured in platinum records, but in the world he built with his own hands, strange, violent, and utterly unique. From Thunder Kiss 65 to More Human Than Human, from House of 1,000 Corpses to The Devil's Rejects, he has proven that horror can be a form of beauty. In his world, guitars scream like chainsaws, drums pound like the heartbeat of a trapped soul, and every frame of his films extends the same message as his songs. Darkness isn't something to fear, it's something to understand. White Zombie laid the foundation for a generation of industrial and shock rock, L. From Marilyn Manson and Static X to Rammstein. But Rob went further. He turned obsession into structured art, transforming blood, bone, and fire into symbols of aesthetic power. In his hands, demons aren't destroyers. They're mirrors reflecting humanity's fanaticism, lust, and hidden fears. Beyond music, he became the guardian of grindhouse cinema, the gritty, violent genre thought to have died with the 1970s. House of 1,000 Corpses was once rejected for being too filthy, yet it grew into a cult monument of B-movie culture, earning Zombie a place among uncompromising directors, beside Tarantino and Rodriguez. And in a world of noise and deceit, Rob chose a simple ending: to live quietly, eat vegan, and care for rescued animals with his wife, Sherry Moon, his muse, partner, and soulmate. On their peaceful Connecticut farm, he no longer needs stage lights. But every morning, as sunlight filters through the window and lands on an old, faded La Sexorcisto poster, you know, Rob Zombie is still creating, only now in silence. For more than 40 years, from the burning carnival of 1977 to the fiery stage of 2025, Rob Zombie has completed the circle. From the boy who saw hell to the man who learned to live with it. And at the end of that road, he doesn't try to prove himself a legend. He only wants to be remembered as the man who dared to turn nightmares into art and made the world listen to its own scream. Perhaps that's the truest definition of rock and roll. Not to be beautiful, but to be real. And Rob Zombie still lives that way, in the dark, with a heart burning brighter than ever. And if you've ever heard that scream just once, you'll understand. Rob Zombie doesn't just make music. He makes rock live again. So what about you? As music grows tamer and flatter, is there anyone left brave enough to be as insane as Rob Zombie? Share your thoughts and join Rock Discovery in celebrating those who dare to live differently.